Hello everyone, Michael Hurwitz here from MIDI Kinetics. I'm very pleased to introduce to you the next evolution of Composer Tools, Composer Tools Pro. Now for those of you who are coming to Composer Tools for the first time, Composer Tools is MIDI Kinetics' specialized controller layout specifically designed for composers who work with sample libraries, virtual instruments, and synths. There are so many amazing libraries out there, each with its own way of doing things, and Composer Tools lets you create layouts for them so that you always have access to their controls. You can assign faders to control their expressiveness, or label key switches to switch articulations and sounds. Composer Tools Pro has so many options and can handle really any modern virtual instrument. And of course, best of all, you can recall any preset instantly directly from your DAW. Just select a track and hit recall, and all of your controls instantly pop up in front of you. This is truly a massive release from MIDI Kinetics. Composer Tools Pro alone has over 30,000 lines of code, giving you an amount of features that's really unprecedented for a lemur controller. There are 128 key switches with height-sensitive velocity triggers that can send multiple MIDI messages simultaneously. Faders and multiballs can go full screen when touched. You can even define default values for all of your controllers and send them all at once, like a big reset button. But because Composer Tools Pro works inside Lemur, you can even create your own totally custom layouts and even recall those. It's the best of both worlds. But Composer Tools Pro isn't just about being an amazing flexible controller. It's also about making your life as a composer so much more productive and flexible with advanced content management features, like allowing you to copy and delete multiple presets at once. You can even decide which parts of a preset to copy. You can tag favorites and filter them. You can search by instrument or by instrument family and filter the search results by developer. And with Composer Tools' new Multi-Edit mode, you can even bulk edit controllers, including the ability to search for controllers by name and dig into their individual attributes. And now with Composer Tools Pro, you can finally go online and share presets with the community. So imagine buying a new sample library and you just jump online and download a ready-made layout, and you're instantly creating music. So now that we've had an overview of Composer Tools Pro, let's get into the walkthrough. With so many controls, a lot of thought had to go into how to make Composer Tools Pro easy to navigate, and in general, you can get anywhere you like with one or at most two taps. So starting with the main controllers on the left, 6 faders, those can go full screen when touched. A multi-ball, also full screen. Switches that can now output multiple MIDI messages, an oscillator for doing cool controller effects, and the fader space, which is one of 3 areas for putting custom controls. We'll talk about custom controls later. Continuing on at the top right, more faders, more switches, and XY pads, also full screen on those. The main user area for custom controls. The main feature with this area is that it can be recalled along with presets, whereas the other custom areas are global areas. Again, we'll talk about custom controls later. And finally, the universal toolbox with some useful global MIDI modules, like the one-shot controller, which allows you to send any MIDI message at any value, very useful for MIDI-based studios, and the universal faders. Then at the bottom, you can open the utility buttons, which you can use for sending DAW key commands and macros, and there are 168 of them now. And of course, the thumb key, again for custom controls, a great place to put MK transport or other quick access commands. But if you look at the bottom left of the interface, you'll notice that a little drawer opened up with icons that represent each of the main controller tabs from the beginning. These are quick return icons, so the idea is that you just press one, and it instantly takes you back and changes tabs at the same time. So it's only one tap for fast navigation around the interface. And by the way, you can also double tap any of the navigation bars to free scroll. At the top left of the interface, we have the main menu, where you can access the directory, enter edit mode, and get to preferences. Editing presets has been made so much easier in Composer Tools Pro. You just swipe over to edit mode, tap an object, and start editing away. Everything's done in real time, all on screen, so you can see your changes as you make them. There's also a new move mode, which allows you to swap controller positions. So you could, for example, easily swap the position of the modulation and expression faders here without having to actually recreate them every time. Composer Tools Pro has an all-new directory with advanced content management features. You can assign favorites and filter them. Or you can search for instruments, say, for example, if I want to find all of my oboes. But if you hold the Family button before pressing oboe, all of the instruments in the woodwind family will be shown, since of course the oboe is a woodwind instrument. You can also search by developer, so if you want to see all of your VSL woodwinds, you could do that too. But we'll come back later to talk about the directory because there are some very deep features there, like the multi-edit mode, which allows you to bulk edit controllers. Preferences are just here, again in the main menu. You can do things like set your lemur connection and turn off things like animations and full screen faders. The options in there are pretty simple and self-explanatory. Key switches in Composer Tools Pro are very powerful because, of course, a big challenge with working with modern virtual instruments is switching articulations and sounds. In Composer Tools Pro, you now have space for 128 key switches. Because there are two pianos, if you press the piano icon, you can actually split them into two separate ranges. And there are lots of virtual instruments out there that split the key switches into two ranges like that. So if we go into edit mode and then hit the piano icon, we can start editing the basic key switch setup. In Composer Tools Pro, you can even change the key switch layout to pads. It just depends on your personal preference and what works best for the instrument. Next is an option called Play Piano Key. And what this does is it turns off the default piano output. So by default, the key switches work just like a MIDI piano, and there are actually three ways that you can control velocity. You can hit higher or lower on a key. You can move the velocity slider as you hit the key, or you can double tap the velocity slider to set fixed velocities for all the keys. And the pads layout works in the exact same way. So it's just a MIDI piano, and that works fine for many sample libraries, but not every composer likes to work this way, and in fact, not every sample library works this way. And sometimes you need to control key switches using control change messages or even program change messages. And of course, you can do this now in Composer Tools Pro. In fact, every single key switch can send up to 3 simultaneous MIDI messages in any combination of note, CC, or program change message. So to edit a key switch, you just tap it. And of course, you can give the key switch a label and a color. And because Play Piano Key is still on, Composer Tools is reminding us of the default output for this key. But you'll also see that there are 3 additional outputs. So you could even assign it to a totally different note or a controller with some specific value, and there's lots of libraries out there that do that. Or perhaps if it's a synthesizer, you could use program change messages. And of course, you can stack the MIDI messages for more complicated key switching situations. So I'll just exit out of edit mode now. And when I go to press the piano icon and swipe over to info, you'll see my new assignment. But the problem is we're still playing the piano note. And that's exactly what the Play Piano Key option is for. So I'll just go back into editing the basic key switch setup, and I'll turn off Play Piano Key. And now only your custom MIDI messages will be sent. So the next thing is, when a preset is loaded, we don't want to have to scroll into the correct octave range every time. So in the key switch setup options, you can have Composer Tools Pro automatically scroll to the correct range on load. So to demonstrate that, I'll just close this up and then scroll into the wrong range. And just press recall. So key switching is very powerful in Composer Tools Pro, and it can handle any sample library. The last option is the default key switch, and this is for the Send Defaults button. This is one of Composer Tools Pro's best new features. I'll just set this and double tap the Send Defaults button, and Composer Tools Pro will automatically play this note. In Composer Tools Pro, all of your controllers can have default values, and by double tapping the Send Defaults button, you can send all of your default values simultaneously. It's like a big reset button. Because typically what happens when you're composing is that you're writing this great music, maybe you need to bring up the vibrato slider a lot, and then you have to decrease the volume because it's getting too loud, and then you need to trigger a bunch of key switches to make a passage sound right. Well, now you're ready to start on the next section of music, but everything sounds totally different because all of your controllers only made sense for the previous passage of music. And it's a real problem in MIDI sequencing that's caused headaches for composers for years. So with Composer Tools Pro, you just hit record, and double tap the Send Defaults button. And everything will be back to the default value, and you can guarantee that the next passage of music will play back the same way every time. Because faders are so important in music production, we wanted to give you a lot more options in Composer Tools Pro. As I mentioned in the intro, faders can go full screen when touched, which is one of my favorite features because I don't have to look down at my hand so much while I play. You can turn this off in Preferences. Of course, you can give a fader any label you want, but if you assign a fader to a common CC number, like CC1, CC11, or CC7, it'll automatically label itself with its common name, so it's just a bit of a time saver there. Faders can now have different output scales. There's linear, exponential, and logarithmic. Exponential is particularly good for quiet music because you can still have a wide range of finger movements without actually affecting the volume too much. You can snap the fader to a grid between 0 and 32 steps, which is useful for any synth or sample library that uses stepped values to select different sounds, and there's quite a few of those, and many synths work like that. Next is RTZ, and this stands for Return on Z. What this does is it resets the fader when you release your finger. It's like a pitch bend wheel that you would find on top of a MIDI keyboard, except in Composer Tools Pro, any fader can have this behavior, and it can reset to any position. So it's great for temporary controls so that you don't forget to reset them. It's like having a mini Send Defaults button built into the fader, except it happens automatically. And speaking of which, next is where you set the default height for the Send Defaults button. But there's actually another hidden way that you can send the default value for a fader. Just double tap the label. And another hidden feature, if you single tap the label, you'll send the current value of the fader, because sometimes you don't actually want to record a ramp. So this will just output a one-shot of the fader's current value. And of course, finally, we have our old friend, the pitch bend wheel. And we know that not everybody likes these, so instead of forcing everyone to use one, you can just turn any fader into pitch bend with a single button. The multi-ball is of course the best thing about using a touchscreen as an expression controller because of course you can control two CCs at once. So maybe you have volume going in one direction and vibrato going in the other direction, and you can get really expressive performances. I'm just going to turn off the full screen multi-ball while I demonstrate more of it. Again, you just do that in Preferences. At any time, you can have up to 10 balls, which has a few uses. The coolest use I've seen is as a live guitar effects rig controller, where the player was using it to blend in multiple loops and effects in real time, which is really cool. You can add physics to each ball, which will give sort of a natural decay to the sound. And you can set the friction, which controls how much resistance to energy it has. And in fact, if you turn this all the way down, the ball will keep going forever. And also the velocity, which is the speed. You can set the starting number of balls by editing the Multi-Ball Setup button, and this is the number of balls that will be present when the preset is loaded. And of course, you can give each ball a label, and set the CC output for the X and Y axis. And finally, set the default value for the Send Defaults button. You do want to be a bit careful here though, because if you have a fader and a multi-ball set to the same controllers, you're going to send both, so maybe just choose one or the other. Switches, of course, are just simple MIDI on-off buttons. Pretty much every sample library in the world has some of these. Of course, you can give each switch a label, but now you can also give each independent pad a label as well. So since a switch is usually just a CC controller where the top pad is max value of 127 and the bottom pad is the minimum value of 0, you can just use Quick CC Assign and Composer Tools Pro will take care of this for you. You can just hit the label to see how the switch is assigned. But of course, this is Composer Tools Pro, so now each pad can send up to 3 simultaneous MIDI messages in any combination of note, CC, or program change message. A great way to use this is for simultaneously setting multiple CCs. Say, for example, if you have some special setting where you need to crank up CC2, CC3, and CC4 all together, you could set them all to one switch and then turn them all on or off together with one button. And of course, the magical Send Defaults button, where you can choose either the top or bottom pad. Again, take care here not to send duplicate values. The next two main controller sections, the pulse and the fader space, I'm going to skip over those for now because they're actually global controllers. And right now, I just want to stick to the controllers that are attached to presets. In the next main area of the interface, you have additional faders and switches. There are a number of libraries out there with a ton of controllers, so Composer Tools Pro has you covered. But right at the bottom, there are 4 simple XY pads. They're exactly like the multi-ball, but only one ball at a time, with physics and settings for CC and label. To edit a preset's basic directory settings, you tap the title bar. Here's where you can give the preset a title. Next, you can set the recall address for Composer Tools' recall feature. There is a separate video in the knowledge base that shows you how to set up recall in Composer Tools Pro because it's different for each DAW, so be sure to go check that out. And of course, set the developer and instrument search tags for the directory search filters. If you want to add a new developer to the list, just scroll down to Add New. Next, we have the user space tab settings. And the user space is a place for putting your own custom controls to extend Composer Tools functionality that can be recalled like a preset. So let's talk about that now. And to do so, let's just head over to the Lemur editor. All right, so if you scroll over to this third window here, you'll see an empty container. And this is called the user space. And this is a place for you to put your own custom controls. If you click on it, you'll see that it lives in your user folder at the top of Lemur. It's just a normal Lemur container that has 10 tabs. You can actually delete this image if you like. I have a pre-made set of controls that I'll just drag into one of the tabs. So this is really the great thing about having Composer Tools Pro be made for Lemur is that you aren't just limited to the controls that we've built into the app. You have access to all of Lemur's objects and scripting capabilities for you to create your own custom stuff. Now, of course, in Lemur, you can just manually switch tabs by tapping the labels. But let's say that this is a sort of general purpose synth preset. I'm just going to go into edit mode. And the user space does get hidden when you go to edit mode, so don't be alarmed. What would be really nice is if when I switched to, let's say, a synthy preset, if the tabs just switched automatically for me to that synth module. So this is exactly what the user space tab setting is. It automatically switches to a tab when the preset is loaded. So just to demonstrate that, if I select the wrong tab now, and then reload the preset, now I get the correct tab. So this was a feature that was available in Composer Tools version 1, but you can actually take this a bit further in Composer Tools Pro, because even though the tabs change, Composer Tools won't automatically scroll to the user area. So if I'm looking at my key switches, and then I reload the preset, the tabs changed, but I actually wanted to see my user space immediately. So what you can do is just set auto scroll to user space. And now I don't even have to look at the other controllers. It's like the best of both worlds with your custom controllers inside a recallable container. You aren't just limited to 10 tabs, you can actually just add more in the Lemur editor. But when you do that though, unfortunately Lemur has no way to know that you've added more tabs, so you have to go into Composer Tools Prefs and just tell it that you added more. So we're going to head back to Lemur now, but before we do, I should mention that this container here, the user container, is where all of your custom settings live. It's here that you'll add new memory banks, and this is the container that you actually transfer to a new version of Composer Tools. For that, just check out the website for more info. All right, and so that's really it for a tour of all of the controllers that are assignable to presets. All the controllers we've talked about so far are all saved along with each preset, and they're recalled either when you load the preset from the directory or using Composer Tools Pro's recall feature. Besides the controllers assignable to presets, Composer Tools Pro also features some global controllers that are always available to you at any time. So let's go through those. The pulse section is just a simple oscillator with settings for tempo, subdivision, waveform, and amplitude. Just select a CC number and hold the button. Besides sine wave, there's also square, triangle, and sawtooth waves. Very cool and modern, great with synths. Next is the fader space. It's just like the user space, except it's a global space that isn't tied to any presets. Again, you'll see it in your user folder if you click on it, and you can just drag Lemur controllers there to build custom objects. The whole reason that it's here is to give you a spot to put performance controls while still giving you access to your key switches. So maybe you have a wind controller that can receive controller settings from Lemur. This would be a great place to put them. And of course, it wouldn't be a MIDI Kinetics controller without the Thumb-Key, which is just a container that floats over the entire Composer Tools user interface. You can use it as a quick access container for global commands like MIDI Kinetics Transport Module for Lemur, MK Transport. By default, the Thumb-Key disappears when you release the button, but you can double tap to latch it. And new in Composer Tools Pro, if you go to Prefs, there's an option to turn on Thumb-Key Transparency, which makes the Thumb-Key act like an invisible layer on top of everything else. So perhaps you could just have a small little transport sticky that's always available, floating above the interface. One of our most requested features was for more utility buttons. So now there are 168 of them, and you can use these for triggering DAW key commands and macros. The possibilities there are really endless and limited only by your DAW. For example, in Cubase, you have the generic remote where you can find that pretty much any program feature can be remotely controlled by MIDI, and same with Logic's key command window. Just like the Thumb-Key, the utility button window disappears when you release your finger. So the idea is that you slide over to the button you need, and the command is sent when you release your finger, which closes the window. But you can also double tap to latch. Of course, you can give each button a label and a color. But new in Composer Tools Pro, each utility button can go out any Lemur target or MIDI channel. And you probably want to put their output on a different Lemur target than Composer Tools Pro's main output, because you don't actually want to record the output of these buttons onto your tracks. They're just DAW commands. Each utility button can now send up to 5 simultaneous MIDI messages in any combination of note, CC, or program change. And what's nice about this is you can actually build into Composer Tools Pro macro commands that do multiple things. So maybe your first command selects all the tracks under your cursor, and then the next command selects only the regions from the cursor to the end of the project, and then the third command deletes them. But sometimes you'll run into a situation where you'll find that one command requires slightly a bit more time before executing the next step. So you can actually have Composer Tools wait a bit in between messages, which should ensure that all the commands get executed properly by your DAW. And of course, you can move the utility buttons around with the option to either replace and overwrite the existing ones or just swap their positions. And if you look right at the bottom left of the screen, you also now have the ability to multi-edit them, which is very useful for enabling sets of commands, setting the Lemur target, or changing their color. All the way over at the end is the MIDI toolbox, where you'll find a few really useful general-purpose MIDI modules. The first panel is the one-shot output, and this panel basically lets you send a one-time output of any MIDI value. It's just a great little MIDI utility. For example, there are lots of synthesizers out there that allow you to change sounds by switching program change messages. Well, here you can send any individual program change message, one at a time, and cycle through all the patches and listen until you find the right sound. So it's great for experimentation. If you're a sample library developer, you're going to love this panel because you can send any individual value and check what's going on in your implementation. There's also an all notes off command for those times where a sample library gets a stuck note, which is really annoying, so this is handy to have. And any of these commands can go out any Lemur target and even multiple MIDI channels at once. Directly below that, we have the universal faders. And this is just a bank of 8 faders that can send on any Lemur target or MIDI channel. And composers most commonly use these for controlling mix faders. So maybe this fader controls all of your string levels, and this one controls the level of a dialogue or sound effects track if you're doing film scoring, or maybe a reverb send. And because you can send them on any Lemur target, you can route them however you want, perhaps to some external digital mixing board. They're just incredibly useful to have. So that's been a tour of all of the controller possibilities in Composer Tools Pro. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Composer Tools Pro is about more than just controllers. It's also about making your working life as a composer easier, because as any professional composer will tell you, it can be a lot of work to set up and maintain a composing studio. You know, there are hundreds of tracks and every sample library works in a different way. So to deal with this, Composer Tools Pro has advanced content management features that make this easy. And so it all starts in the directory, and let's head there now. Composer Tools Pro's new directory now lets you copy and delete multiple presets at once. So say I want to do a little directory organization here and put all of my Spitfire audio libraries into one section. I can just search for them, select them, and just paste them wherever I want. Now, if I wanted to simply just move them, I can choose to delete the old ones. But if I wanted to make copies, then I can do that too. But there's actually more to copying than just mindlessly moving presets around in Composer Tools Pro, because you can be specific about which controllers you want to move. If you look at the panel on the right, you'll see a list of available controllers, and you just choose which controllers you need and deselect the ones you don't. And deletion works in the same way, so you can delete the entire preset or only delete the controllers you don't need. So for example, if you wanted to disable recall on all of these presets, well, one way that you could do that is to just selectively delete it. So this is just one type of multi-preset editing that you can do. But Composer Tools Pro takes this even farther, because as useful as it is, unfortunately it doesn't yet help us add new controllers to multiple presets, or to make small changes to the individual controllers across multiple presets. And this is exactly what Multi-Edit is for. With Multi-Edit, there are two modes: Multi-Edit Interface and Multi-Edit Attributes. With Multi-Edit Interface, you're presented with this blank interface, you make your edits, and then those edits are applied to all the presets. With Multi-Edit Attributes, you can search for controllers by name and dig into their individual attributes. So let's see some examples of how we can use these two modes. Here are a bunch of woodwinds, and they all have pretty similar layouts. They all have almost identical faders and switches and stuff, but they do have different key switches. And this is a situation that you'll often run into when you're using a bunch of different instruments from the same developer. So the issue is, I want to add a volume fader to this third position here in all of these presets without having to edit them one by one. And this is exactly what Multi-Edit Interface is great for, adding or removing controllers to multiple presets. So again, the idea is simple. You get this blank layout, you make your changes, but the difference is you're allowed to choose which objects you want to copy, and only the objects you select will be applied to the presets. So you can use this technique to multi-edit faders, multi-ball setup, multi-balls, switches, key switches, key switch setup, and the XY pads. Now, while this worked great for this situation, there are two limitations to this mode. The first limitation is that you have to copy the entire object and all of its properties together. And the second limitation is it relies on the position of the object. So to demonstrate the problem, here is another example. It's just a bunch of fake presets that I made up. And all of these presets have a staccato key switch, but the issue is that the key switch is in different positions of the keyboard. So if we can't rely on the position, then what we really want to do is to search for them by name, and that's what Multi-Edit Attribute is for. So I just select the presets that I want from the list, and on the right, Composer Tools Pro presents us with a list of all the different attributes that each preset has: faders, key switches, directory settings, etc. So we want the key switches, so I'll just select them. Now, I don't want to edit the key switch setup. What I want to do is search for a key switch, so I'll select that, and then I'll search for staccato. And we found them, so let's edit. I'll just make them blue. Hit next, and again, we're given the opportunity to select only the attributes we want. It's just like Multi-Edit Interface, but here we're choosing individual attributes, not whole objects. So this mode is incredibly powerful. You can actually double tap a bank, and all of the presets in that bank will be selected, making it easy, for example, to change the output scale of all of the modulation faders, or to set all of your key switch layouts to pads. Composer Tools Pro's directory also features a recall editor, which is just a convenient editor that you can use to edit recall addresses and other directory settings directly from the directory. Here you'll also find a cool feature that allows you to search for any recall address conflicts and resolve them. Because remember that each preset has to have its own unique mailing address. And actually, if you try and recall a preset that has the same address as another one, you'll get a warning and it's going to take you here. So this is very helpful if you've downloaded somebody else's layouts from the user library and they have addresses that conflict with yours. So that's Composer Tools Pro. I hope it makes your life working with virtual instruments and sample libraries so much more productive and creative. Thanks for watching.